Hey, I'm Zach.
And I'm Jesse.
You're watching our Now Let's Review. So this is better than a Powerwall. This is our installation video on the big battery Ethos system. So if you watched our in-depth, which I think you probably should first, this is if you're interested to see if you're going to have the skills and the know-how, like us knuckleheads, to install it. So we're going to walk through the whole install process or whole thinking process to see if this is a good fit for you, how you might use it, and then how the install went.
And there will be chapters in the video, so it'll hopefully help you skip around to the section that you might be working on.
All right, so I think the first step in any project is the planning step. Don't get too excited and just go to the website and buy a bunch of stuff.
It's very tempting
because
the prices are really good.
So let's talk about what our thinking was in planning our project, and then we'll talk about the answers to that for this particular project. So the first thing I think you want to think about is,
what are you trying to accomplish by buying a battery system?
Right. Is it to get you off grid because maybe you have a cabin in the woods?
Is it to offset something that uses a lot of energy, like maybe a car charger for electric car, or maybe your air conditioning, or maybe grow lights, or a Bitcoin miner,
right,
or a heater, all that kind of stuff?
Or do you just want to have some backup in case, you get a power outage, which happens a lot all over the place?
Next, you want to consider is, what is your budget? Because it's not just the stuff that you're going to buy from Big Battery that is what you're going to buy. We're going to be talking about Romex. We're going to be talking about sub panels and breakers, because unfortunately,
wire is expensive.
Unfortunately, wire has become expensive.
Next question is, how much storage do you need? So here's where you ask, what is it I'm going to be running on this system? And we'll talk about our case in a minute.
Yes. And the way that you think about this is you need to know how much power you're drawing.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say there's some homework involved. So let's just talk about, let's say, a refrigerator. You can't just be like, yeah, I think it uses 100 watts. No, you need to know. So there's a couple ways to do it. One thing I'd suggest is, we'll put a link down below, is a thing called a kilowatt. And that is basically, you plug that into the wall, you plug your appliance into that, and then it can keep track of how much energy it's using. So over a 24-hour period, you can be like, oh, it used 2 kilowatt hours of energy. And then you can do your math based on the realities.
Because you're going to need to know, based on a certain size battery, how long that's going to be able to last, or when we start talking about solar. So that gets into our next section. How much solar do you need? The answer might be 0. As we said before, if you were to offset, you might live in a place where all you need is a battery, because there are cheaper electricity prices throughout the day. And the only problem is that you'd like to run your air conditioner when your house is hot, not when the electricity is cheapest.
Right.
And this battery will allow you to buy cheap electricity, which you can program in, and then use that energy whenever you need it, but you're always buying cheaper energy or greener energy or something like that. And so in those cases, you might not need solar. In other cases, you might want to be running completely off of solar, because where we live, there are no off-peak times. The price of electricity stays the same throughout the day. It's 24 cents a kilowatt hour. It's quite high.
There's 2 limiting factors usually on solar, and that is your budget, how much you can afford to spend, and do you have enough room to put them? So basically, if you have enough money and enough space, you can put a lot of solar.
We are going to be making a video in the future where we're going to be making a shed roof that is going to be waterproof. Hopefully, we haven't built it yet, so I don't know. We're going to be making a shed roof that is going to be solar. It'll hopefully generate electricity and provide more value to our property.
Well, and you forgot it's made entirely out of solar panels.
Yes, the whole roof is made out entirely of solar panels, which I think is a really cool way to do it. And think about using used solar panels. There's lots of really fun and exciting things to think about when we're talking about solar.
Next, you're going to ask, where are the batteries going? Are they going in your basement, in the garage, on the side of your house? You need to know that so that you get the right batteries that fit, whether or not they can get wet, whether they can get cold or hot.
And this brings you to the next question, where is the inverter going? And the answer to that question is very close by and to the left. As you will see in our installation video, the way that this particular kit comes, it comes with an inverter that needs to be within about 4 or 5 feet of the battery itself.
Right. Next question has to do with the electrical sub panel. In a lot of these projects, you're going to want a sub panel. And so that's the question. Where is that sub panel going?
And also, where is the main panel in the house? You don't get to decide where it's going unless you're building the house from scratch. So usually you have to go down to the basement and find where that main panel is if you're going to be drawing power from it.
Next question is, where is the solar going? And you have lots more choices than you probably think. I mean, yes, roofs are great because
you're not taking up any space,
but they kind of have to be south-facing in the most of the cases. They can't be shaded. And so sometimes that just eliminates whole parts of your house. But there are other places, possibly, depending on where you live, that you could put them, like we're going to build a shed roof, or maybe you could put them on an existing, maybe you have a little shed or something that you put them on, or a carport. So be looking around at places where the solar could go.
And then, I mean, solar is its own topic to dive into. We're going to be, unfortunately, in this video, we're not going to be going too deep in solar specifically on MPPT controllers and watts and amps and volts and stuff like that. That is something that we can't really cover in this video. So we're going to kind of skim over that.
Next up is how will you get these heavy things, these heavy batteries, to where you want them placed?
And so whether that's
This is time to call your brother-in-law. He's got a van, doesn't he?
Well, it's all within your house, though. You're going to get these delivered to your house from a van. The question's going to be, how strong is your brother-in-law?
That's true. If he owns a van, he's probably strong enough.
Can he really deadlift, 450 pounds?
That's what's so nice about this project. They came on a big pallet, but you can take the pallet apart, and each piece wasn't too bad, especially if you use those shoulder lifts, which we used a lot of. So 2 people did do all this work. But yeah, I think you're going to need 2 fairly strong people for a lot of the big pieces of this.
And maybe a third medium strength person just to help lift some final, mainly the inverter. And we had the 12 kilowatt inverter.
Next question is, how much power will you get from your main panel? And so you need to go look at your main electrical panel and see how many amps that is so that you know that answer.
And then you need to know about your inverter and how much energy the inverter can draw from the grid. So before you buy it, read the manual, which you can get from the website, and see how much power you can draw. You can also set how much power you want to draw, and that's going to determine your gauge of wire that you're going to run from the main panel to your inverter.
If you're getting overwhelmed at this point, I understand. We're going to answer all these questions in a minute so that you'll see our thinking process, which I think is a good way to learn. Coming up on the last couple of questions here, how much power will your inverter be able to produce off battery power? And so you'll need to know the answer to that because that depends on what you can power. And then lastly, how will you be able to expand off of this system if you need to? And so that's the beautiful part about this Ethos system is that you can add more batteries. And so if you're thinking like, oh no, I'll be stuck, you're probably not stuck. You can probably actually add more batteries. As of recording this, each 5 kilowatt hour brick is about $1,700. So it's not that expensive to expand your system. All right, so let's go back to how we thought of it. Let's go to our first question of what are we trying to accomplish here with our system?
Well, we live in a town and we live in a house which has a 200 amp service panel. So we're pretty good in terms of getting the amount of electricity that we need. This would mean that going off grid, while fun, don't really need to. And plus with the size of our home, which is enormous, which is helpful for you guys because our house is so big and complicated. If we're going to run into a problem, then you might run into that problem. So we'll cover it for you. Or do we want a battery backup system? And right now our house already has a battery backup system
Then why are we doing this?
Power walls. So what we're going to try and do is further offset our grid, our home microgrid, by adding a buffering system for our air conditioning unit. Again, we're in the sort of position where we already have a battery backup, so all of this is sort of stupid and moot, but I don't think it is. I think that this is actually really interesting. This is a way for us to add more solar onto our house as individuals, not having to hire an electrician to go rip apart our Tesla system. And ruin our power purchase agreement with Tesla.
And I also want to point out, we've done some crypto mining and we've been discovering that since Massachusetts charges so much for electricity in our town, 24 cents a kilowatt hour at the moment, that it's made crypto mining not worth it. And so we were like, is there a way to do free crypto mining? And that's part of what the system is for.
So essentially what we're going to be doing is taking a couple different circuits out of our main panel, which used to be powering the air conditioner. We're going to be putting it into a sub panel, which is powered by the inverter, and the inverter is hooked up to both solar, the battery, and the grid. So it can take power from any of those 3 sources, and we can configure the inverter to do exactly what we ask it to do.
Yep.
I know that that's a lot to take in, and that's why we have a graphic explaining it, because it's a lot to keep to keep track of. So what we're trying to do here essentially is back up our air conditioner, and if we have any extra, because we're going to build an overpowered solar system, use that for crypto mining and make a bit of money to offset the cost of the project.
And that leads to the next question. What is our budget on this? Well, this system costs us how much?
$10,000.
And so that's the inverter and the batteries.
So big inverter, 3 batteries. This is essentially bigger and more powerful than a Powerwall 3. And because we're going to be doing the installation, it's going to be cheaper than a Powerwall 3. Now, I know that a Powerwall 3 is under 10 grand, but that's before installation, and we have a very complicated house. So And we already have Powerwalls, so it's kind of...
And I will throw in, it's probably another $250 in wiring and assorted outlet boxes and stuff like that.
It's
so
true.
that was our budget. Okay, so next is how much storage do we need? So in this case, we did some math. We thought that 15 kilowatt hours sounded like enough to run the air conditioning on a hot day. And that was kind of our limiting factor was, okay, we need to make sure that on a hot day, we don't just run out of power in an hour.
Exactly. And the reason that you ask a question like that is because, well, it also goes back to the next question, which is how much solar do you need? So we said, well, any solar would be great, right? Because if I can generate 1 kilowatt hour a day, that's 1 kilowatt hour I don't need to pay for. You're going to have to budget this. It's all going to depend on your price of electricity and what you could accomplish using either off-grid charging or whatever. You don't have to add solar to your project, as we talked about before.
And you can do it in a slow and steady way. You can start with a panel, then go to 3. So what we're doing right now for the test is 5 panels out on the ground. But what we're going to be having with our solar shed is how many?
15.
15. So 15 times about 250 watts each brings us to about a 3 kilowatt system. And we'll learn more if it's truly going to be 3 kilowatts once we get it up and running.
And you have to keep in mind that 3 kilowatts is the same as 3 kilowatt hours per hour.
Right.
You can't sell it the hours. That's why it's kilowatts.
Right. So in general, on a sunny day, you can expect to get 6 to 8 hours of sun, depending on your area, maybe more if you're in the desert or near the equator.
But that's not peak sun.
Right.
So again, this is why we can't get into solar specifically on this video. We probably will get into it more on future videos. But solar is a big part of what this could be, but it doesn't have to be. And in this video, we're not going to be super focused on it.
But again, going back to how much storage do we need to make sure that we got the right amount of solar and the right amount of storage so that they'll work well together. And we think that 3 kilowatts of solar and 15 kilowatt hours of battery work well together. Mm-hmm. Next is, where are the batteries going?
So we knew that they were going to go in the basement. And one of the main reasons for this is because that's where our main panel is. This kind of determines, I would say, probably where your batteries are going to go.
Exactly, because first of all, it lowers the amount of wire you have to buy, and wire is expensive right now. But also, it lowers the number of holes you have to drill in your house to get the wire around your house. So in this case, we tried to keep them close together in the basement.
So we put the battery and the inverter on the finished side of the basement, and we put our sub panel on the unfinished side of the basement, which was just across the wall from each other, which kept the wiring costs as low as we could possibly keep them.
Next is, where is the solar going? And that's going to eventually be our new solar shed, and that's just about 20 feet away from where we're putting the system, so it's going to be pretty easy to wire up.
Next was, how will we get these heavy things to where we want them to be placed?
Jesse!
We carried them. It wasn't that bad. We slid them down our stairs. We have very narrow, winding stairs. Again, we have a crazy complicated house. This is where it's useful.
But like if this were a Powerwall, which weighs, I think, 283 pounds, I've watched 2 giant electricians handle that thing, and my back felt bad watching them. This was nice because none of the actual pieces weighed more than 90 pounds, I believe. So
and the inverter was the heaviest piece.
Right. So handling each of the bricks was pretty easy. They were like 50 pounds. So that's really what's nice about the system, is that normally you'd have to be thinking like, oh my gosh, I need to hire movers. And here we didn't.
Yep.
So next up is, how much power will you be getting from your main panel? And this is kind of limited to the next question, which is, how much power will your inverter be able to produce off battery power? Our inverter can handle
12 kilowatts.
Right. And
now,
it's 50 amps.
It's 50 amps at 240 volts.
Right.
If you're losing me, don't worry. We're going to be getting into this a little bit more. So the United States electrical grid system for home uses what's called split phase power. What that essentially means is that you have a 120 volt leg, another 120 volt leg, and a neutral. And in your typical household outlet, you only see one of the legs and the neutral. Those are the 2 flat ones. And then if you're like, well, then what's the face? That one's the ground. Okay, so we have the hot and the neutral. But in a 240 volt outlet, you'll notice that there's 4 pins. And you go, what the heck? How, I thought electricity only... Right. That's because it's even crazier. In 240 volts, in an American system, you take the 120 volt and the other 120 volt, and they're actually going out of phase of each other. And when you combine them together, the phases, welcome to the world of electricity, the phases will equal 240 volts. This is how you're able to do like car charging most of the time, is you have a higher voltage, which means that the amps can stay lower to get a higher wattage. So the inverter can do 12 kilowatts. If you take 12 kilowatts and you divide it by 240 volts, you get 50 amps. Those 50 amps is 240 volts coming off of the main panel, which means that you need a breaker that can accommodate that.
Right.
So we put in a 50 amp breaker to our unit. You may want to size one up. It depends on your code and depends on what you're trying to do. We knew that we weren't going to be drawing much from the grid. It would be very rare that we actually want to be taking power from the grid. But just to give us the full potential and to show you, we made our system as big as it could be.
Right. You can go smaller, save a little money on breakers and wire, and just tell your inverter not to use all the power.
Exactly.
And then lastly, how will we be able to expand our system if we need to?
So the way that we would have to do this, unfortunately, is we would either have to go on the other side of the wall. If you're looking at a picture of it, you see that there's a door to the right, and normally you would just kind of continue.
Why don't we
it
just
off the
stack
side.
more on top?
You can only go 3 high in terms of battery modules, and then the battery brain has to sit on top of the third
They're
one.
afraid maybe it's going to fall over or something. It gets too top heavy.
I think that's what they're
Why can't we stack it in front of it?
I talked to the rep. They have really useful customer service. So if we don't answer a question, I would urge you to reach out to Big Battery's customer service. Right on their website, they have a little chat. It doesn't bring you to a chat bot. It brings you to a real person.
Nice.
So I'm assuming that's only certain times of day that it's going to be working. But you could chat with them and make sure that it's going to work for you. So you do have to be thinking about expansion if you were thinking about expansion. I think what we have is probably as big a system as we want for this particular location.
All right, so now you're watching us start the installation process. You're seeing us carry the batteries in. You're seeing us stack them on top of each other. And I thought that we were going to get complicated right off the bat. I thought there would be all sorts of weird diagrams and hookups and things. It was so fast and so simple. You stack them up. So we've got the 4 things stacked here. You make sure you attach it to the wall correctly. And again, like I've said in the previous video, if you've ever mounted a TV, like a flat screen TV to the wall using a bracket, then I think you're smart enough and you have the skills to do this. It's very similar. You just want to make sure that, you're not going to drill holes into pipes and into wires. But if you feel comfortable finding studs and mounting things to studs, then I think you're good to go with this. If not, then hire a carpenter and have them do it.
The way that we did it was we found the stud for one side. It's not the batteries aren't 16 inches wide, so we decided instead of like putting a plywood plate in front or behind it, we decided we would just have drywall anchors on the other side.
Right.
The stud is not going to fall over, even if somebody tugged on the batteries as hard as they could.
Exactly.
So it's not going to fall over.
Right. Unlike a television, which is trying all the time to fall out of the wall, this is sitting on the ground.
Yep.
All right. So now that the battery is there, now we need to hook up the actual battery wire so that each module is talking to itself. And here again, I thought this was going to just be overwhelming, but it's not, because Big Battery supplies you with just the right wiring, and it's all quick connect. So it not only is it labeled, not only is it quick connect, but they have a really great video on their website that shows you how to do it. And so I think it took us like 7 minutes or something to wire it up.
There is one caveat to that, which is that in their video, on the final connection between the battery module and the controller, it has like a really long wire which goes to the bottom battery and the top the controller box, and then there's a shorter one which goes from the battery module to the controller, but at the top battery module. And the problem that we had was that they had given us slightly longer wires, and I wasn't sure if you could plug one into one and versus another, and that meant that we kind of like crossed them up and really had to tie them up tightly in order to fit them. We then reached out to Big Battery, and they were like, you don't have to do that. You can just run it so that way it works well.
Yep.
And we'll show you kind of the 2 ways that we've done it here. And yeah, don't cross them or wind them so tightly around each other.
Right.
That was pretty stupid.
All right, so now that side's connected. Now we need to go to the smart side, the Ethernet side, and they supply these cables as well, and they're just Ethernet cables, and they plug in really easily. And so you're connecting one brick to another and then all the way up to the controller. So now basically what that's doing is the controller is talking to each battery module and understanding how it's doing. It's like doing a handshake, like, hey, you got enough juice? You want some more juice? That's basically what it's doing. So we hook those all up, and then it came time to do the scary part. First of all, we had to mount the inverter to the wall. And so again, you're going to want to pick the right location. You have to make sure there's enough air for the inverter because it's going to get hot sometimes. And then you have to make sure that it's mounted to the wall. Each one's going to be different. In our case, ours came with a really nice plate that mounts to the wall first. We mounted that to some studs, and then we hung it on that to the wall.
And then there were some brackets which tied it even tighter to the wall so that way it couldn't like be
Slide
lifted
left
off
or
the
right.
bracket during an earthquake or something.
Exactly. So now that the inverter's mounted to the wall, you want to do the next scary part, right? Which is opening that door and installing the wires to that. Now, if everything's been left off, which is what we did, so the inverter's not hooked up to anything, the batteries are off, and so there's no electricity flowing. So even though they're big, scary looking wires, there's no electricity here. Now, here's where I just want to say, disclaimer, if you do not feel comfortable with this or your jurisdiction does not allow it, then yes, hire a professional electrician. There's no shame in that at all. But you would have already saved yourself a lot of money because now you're presenting the electrician with a pretty easy job that they can probably knock out in half an hour versus, oh, I got to lug all this stuff and install it myself.
Right.
So you're saving yourself money. Either way, it's easy to hook up. You're either going to show this video to your electrician or you're going to do it. And it's very easy to do.
I think the hardest part you might have would be to strip the wires. Just make sure that you're stripping, it was about an inch of wire left. And I just used a razor blade. I was very careful not to cut any of the wires in there. Probably cut one or two. It's not going to be the end of the world if you do that. And then, yeah, you loosen the thing, you push it up, and you tighten it. It's really not that hard.
Oh, and by the way, everything is super easy labeled as you saw here, right? We put the battery terminals to the battery, and then we connected the Ethernet cables to the Ethernet connection. So it's a lot like plugging in a router. Okay, so now, in theory, we're not connected to the grid yet. The only thing that's got energy in it is the battery.
And in fact, the batteries cannot supply any power because we haven't turned on the battery breakers for each individual battery. Each battery has its own breaker, which is really nice because for safety. And so what I'm doing here is I'm loosening the screw, which holds that door closed. I'm opening it up, which I learned after a while. You pull down the little white tab, and that unlocks the door, and you can open it, and then you can flick all the breakers on. And then the next thing that we did was we turned on all the batteries.
And let's not forget, we need to set these dip switches on each battery. We need to tell the controller how to address each battery, like hello, number 1 battery, hello, number 2 battery. And you might be like, oh my God, this sounds like computer science. Well, it's just little easy dip switches. And we'll play some audio here. You can tell what we were doing. It took 2 minutes.
And yeah, it was really easy. It was all in the manual. It told you all the steps. You didn't have to like figure this out. This isn't a math problem. We're not a math class.
All right, so now we're setting the IDs for each of the batteries. And we do this with dip switches. So it's under this little plate that Jesse's removing. Basically, we have to tell the controller what each battery is.
Okay, what's 1?
1 is 3 down, so the first 3 down on the left, and then the 4th one up. 2 is the first 2 down, the next one up, and the last one down.
Okay. And again, you can adjust them from 1 to 16 because you can have up to 16 batteries all talking to the same battery controller.
Right, exactly. That's why there's 4 dip switches.
That's like 86 kilowatt hours of battery.
I know. All right, so now the battery's talking to the inverter, and everything seems to be working fine. The problem with the system, if we left it like this, would be there's no energy going in and there's no energy going out. So it's pretty stupid if we don't continue on. And the next step is going to be to talk about our sub panel. So check out what we did here.
So I'm just testing the voltage. I can check between the line 1 and line 2. There should be 240 volts there. And then I'm checking between line 1 and the neutral. We get 120 volts. So that's, again, like I talked about the split phase power. This is a split phase power generator.
All right, so now you're going to be watching us install the sub panel. I don't want to go too deep into this just because everybody's system is different and everyone's idea of what they want for their sub panel is different. But you can watch how we did it so you get an idea of what we're doing. We're going to put this on the other side of the wall right behind this. And so you're going to see us drilling some holes to connect between the two. And if you're wondering right now why we don't have our wires in conduit, it's mainly because we're going to be making some changes to the system soon and we don't have to re-pull it out of the conduit. Also, we think it's easier for you guys to see what we're talking about if we don't bury it in the conduit. But when you guys do it, you're going to be putting in the proper conduit.
And I just want to mention also, we used this particular sub panel. You can use whatever sub panel suits your needs. We knew that we were going to be using a lot of high-powered double breakers, ones that run off of 240, and that would take up most of the load inside the unit. Just so you know, you don't have to make sure that all of the breakers in a sub panel add up to what the sub panel is like receiving. Right. This is a 50 amp sub panel, but we could add 100 amps worth of power draw off of it if we really wanted to.
As long as we're not doing it simultaneously.
Yes,
right.
that's the big
So
thing.
this is where you need to think. If this is going to be for charging your car, for instance, then you really should go check your local code and oversize the wires because car charging is different than almost any other use case because car charging takes hours to do. So just make sure that if this is for, say, charging your Tesla, that you really do the math and you oversize
everything
stuff.
up.
Beef everything up, exactly. All right, so our sub panel is now installed, and that did take a lot of work because, as you can see, we had to do junction boxes and stuff like that.
And
I think it was actually the harder part of the project.
Yeah, and we were running really, really beefy wire.
Right.
We had to run this wire also from our main panel to the inverter, which we will do later.
All right, so now that the sub panel is installed, we're going to be going to the other side of the wall again and hooking this up to our inverter.
Okay, so now we have our sub panel being powered from the inverter, but we also need to power the inverter from the grid.
Oh, right.
So what that means is if you want to hook it up to the grid, you're going to need to probably be touching your main panel in your home. And the scary part to me about a main panel is that it does have a big breaker at the top, but that does not kill everything inside the breaker because there's still power going to it. And that power is coming from like the telephone poles, the power cable from the grid.
And this would be another great place if you're not comfortable to bring in an electrician for this piece of it, because within just a few minutes, they can probably do this part of it and charge you way less because you've done all the other work.
Right. The sub panels, all this other stuff was pretty easy to do.
Yeah, you can do all of that while there's no electricity flowing through it.
It'd be all dead. You could flavor all the cables and lick them all to see which ones they were. You don't. But that's how like safe it is to do a lot of this other stuff while everything is shut off. This is the scariest part for me because there is still power coming in on those three legs.
And also you're killing the power to your panel. So that means that your whole house shuts down. And if you forgot to buy something or you have to, then you have to run out of the house, leaving your whole house without power. So
or have to rush putting everything back together.
So just take your time at this stage, write down every step you're going to take, really think it through, make sure you have all of your parts and everything you need before you do it.
Because we had to do a couple of things before we went to this step. The first one was to wire up our junction boxes. The way that we did this was we shut off the breakers to the things that we didn't want. We cut the wires that go into the main panel, which is a little scary. Cut those wires, wire them over to a junction box, and that junction box is going to carry power from the sub panel, which is being powered by the inverter, up to the junction box, and then from the junction box over to our air conditioners.
Right.
And this whole time, we don't have any air conditioning. So this is another thing. If you're doing this in the middle of July, this may determine how fast or how ready you need to be when you do this. So then what we did was we shut off the power to the main breaker. We removed the two breakers that had been previously powering our air conditioner units. They're both, in our case, it was a 120 and a 240 volt circuit. We took them both out. We had just ripped the wires out because we had already cut them. We replaced one of the breakers with a dummy breaker that wasn't hooked up to anything. This just basically filled that hole in the box so you couldn't stick your finger into it. And then we replaced the 20 amp breaker with a 50 amp breaker. And then that 50 amp breaker got wired up to the inverter. So this, again, heavy gauge wire that was coming into the box. We needed a big Romex connector for it. Wiring it into the box while, again, there's still some live wires in there. So it is a scary thing to work on. Then we got it all hooked up and we had power running to the inverter. All we had to do was switch back on the main panel once we put the panel cover back on.
Yeah, seems really complicated. It takes... I had to think about it like 6 times to be like, wait, we're getting power from the main panel, but we're also sometimes not using power from the main panel. So draw it all out.
Allow your brain to figure it all out.
Yeah, write it out for yourself and makes it so much easier. All right, so now we should, in theory, be ready to turn some things on. And okay, so if we left it like this, that would be pretty exciting, except we'd be only able to do backup power if the grid went down, and also offsetting power, like buying power when it's cheap and using power when it's expensive. But
both are completely valid use cases. Right. If that's what you want to do, you might design the system a little bit differently. You'd probably, if you're just doing a battery backup, probably don't back up your air conditioning, right?
Right. You want to do the whole panel or something.
Keep your lights on, or you want to keep something else on, or back up your whole panel, which is a completely different means of doing it. But that would allow you to do this in a completely different way.
But we wanted to go one step further, and we wanted to add solar. We're basically doing a test right now with the 5 panels outside. We bring those in and hook them up right over here on the left. And like we said before, with this particular inverter, you can have up to 4 sets of solar panels, 3 completely different planes. So it's a really great inverter. And so now with adding solar, we're going to get to do way more complications, right? But the cool part is it gets overwhelming. You're like, oh my God, how do I program an inverter? Do I need to know C++? No, this particular inverter has a very nice interface. Now we have some other inverters that kind of feel like the 1980s, and it feels like you're programming a VCR with tons of menus.
Or a digital watch. And yeah, I mean, this inverter's nice because it's a full GUI. You actually get to see a screen.
It's touchscreen.
You can touch screen. You can tap on it. Now, is it does it feel like an iPhone? No, it doesn't feel like an iPhone because it's not as expensive as an iPhone, amazingly.
I know.
Because the cost of this entire inverter is on par with an iPhone. And it can handle 12 kilowatts of electricity.
And this inverter allows you to actually hook in a dongle so that you can talk to your phone. So you can actually look at an app and do all this stuff on your app and look and view it from your app.
Yeah.
But here we're programming it on the touchscreen, and we're basically giving it what? Some rules?
Essentially, yes. You can decide whether you want to be dealing in battery voltage or state of charge in a percentage, which I love state of charge percentage. That makes sense in my brain. And so you can say, charge up the batteries to 30% from the grid, and then charge up from solar to 100%. But if you didn't have a lithium iron phosphate battery, maybe you don't charge to 100%. You can set that as a parameter. Charge that up, and then...
And so you said 30% just so that like you would always have some juice in the battery?
As like a reserve or backup. Maybe you want 50%. Maybe you want 80%. You can decide, and you can also tweak it. You can go down there every once in a while and be like, hey, you know what? The solar is able to do more charging. I'm going to set the charge limit to 20%. Or you can also set when the AC will take over based on how low the battery gets. So you could set the battery bottom to like 10%, like charge up from AC to 10%. If it's below that, there's something going wrong. Okay, so keep it at 10%. Then turn on the AC when the battery gets to say 20%. I don't mean air conditioning. I mean turn on the load.
I was confused. Okay.
Grab from the grid when it gets down to 20%, and then you have this 10% buffer for things to sit for a while and stuff to get low. There's a number of different ways to do it. You can also say only charge from the grid during these times, or you can say only output from the battery during these times.
Or you can say what to do with the solar, like first feed the air conditioning and then feed the battery.
And because this inverter is export capable, that means that you can sell power back to the grid. Maybe during certain times of the day, you can sell the power back to the grid for more money. Probably not. Most grids don't want you to.
Check with your local jurisdiction, check with your utilities, because you have to have net metering in your jurisdiction and you have to be allowed to do it.
You have to usually have a permit, and the permit's going to be for a certain amount. Our grid definitely wouldn't want us to do this. We've already been permitted to give them up to 10 kilowatts. Right. And so now we're potentially adding more onto that. Now we could go through the red tape of doing it. We are not going to do that today.
Right. And so I think in a future video, we're going to show you our new solar powered shed roof when we build that, and we're going to show you that with this system. But basically, it's working. It's doing everything we want to do. We can now do crypto mining solar powered based. We can now do air conditioning offset by solar power. Does it mean that every single time we turn on our crypto miner or our air conditioning that it's offset? That depends on our solar and how much sun we've been getting and so forth. But it does mean that to the best of our ability, we're offsetting the price to free energy as much as possible.
Yep.
And I just want to go to that last piece here. You might be like, yeah, but solar panels are expensive. Yes, some new panels, especially the new high-tech, high-efficiency ones are, but do you need them? Because what we did was we bought used panels. And if you think about all the bazillions of gigawatts of new solar that's going up, well, a lot of those projects take the old solar and they ditch it. And you can buy that solar. So we're going to...
For pennies on the dollar.
So we're going to put a link down below to where we just happen to get our solar. I'm not endorsing it. I'm just saying that happens to be a place. But we've talked to We Recycle Solar, which is a great company. I'm not sure if they're up and running yet with their solar. But as you come across more and more places to buy used solar panels, here's a solar panel. They don't get old. Like they lose a little bit of their efficiency, but...
Not much.
And this is glass, so it doesn't wear out.
And I know the newer panels have higher efficiency, but in some cases, you want more square footage. What do I mean? Oh, if you're building a roof of something, maybe you want the roof to be really big. Guess what's cheaper than building a roof? Solar panels. Used solar panels are cheaper than the roof.
Yeah, we're going to show you in this new video coming up when we build it that it's probably going to cost just about the same, if not cheaper, to build it out of solar panels than plywood, tar, roofing, asphalt, shingles, all that stuff. Because basically, once you put this out, you've done all of it. You've done the plywood, you've done the roofing shingles. It takes care of all of it. Now, we're going to see if we can prove it, whether it's going to be waterproof or not. But yeah, watch for that, because if it's true, we just found a way to change construction.
Because now you have a roof that costs less
and makes
you money, or saves you a crap load of money.
So as we wrap up here, please let us know down in the comments if you have questions. We'll try and get to those. Hopefully the folks at Big Battery will be monitoring this video as well. If you have questions about Big Battery, go to bigbattery.com. Ask them questions. They love it. Look, we've been working with Big Battery for years. We've done ads for them for years because they have really good stuff. We have one of their older battery systems in our solar trailer. This is one of their newest systems. I'm super excited about the quality. I'm super excited about the fact that they're an American company right here in the U.S. So when you have questions or problems or concerns, you can reach someone who knows what they're talking
Talk
about.
to a real human. It was so nice the other day. I was like, hey, it's Jesse from Now You Know. And they're like, oh, hey, Jesse, do you have some questions? I did have questions. They were able to answer. Because I'm going for the extremes. I'm like, how many batteries could I put? They're like, well, you have 16 per battery module, brain station,
Right.
but
How many do you want?
How many do you want? I'm like,
Yeah. So
holy
again,
crap.
so if you have questions, they're a great source of it. They have great videos up on their website. And this doesn't feel like Chinese junk because a lot of it's made right here in the US. So I really, really appreciated that because this is stuff you're hopefully going to be using for years.
So I really hope that this video was helpful. I hope that it at least explains some of this stuff because I really thought that this was going to be so complicated. When we first went into it and when I first heard about doing your own solar panels and guys like me told me, they were like, hey, you can do your own solar. And I was like, no, I can't. I'm worried about my roof.
Well, and that's what I really want to stress here is if we took a course on this, we would probably spend $10,000. And when we were done, we'd have a certificate that we'd hang on the wall. We spent, $10,000 on equipment. And when we're done, we not only have all that experience that we would have had in a course, but we have hands-on experience and we have a system. So to me, this is well worth it it's going to make you feel so good. You're going to understand once you do your first project.
I know.
So I just recommend do a small project to start. Do the smallest system that you need for you. And I think you'll be just raring to go when you're done.
The smallest system on big battery. Well, they have even smaller systems than Ethos system, but if you wanted an expandable system, that would be the 2 batteries and the 6 kilowatt inverter, which is half the inverter that we had on ours.
And that's half the price of a Powerwall.
It's $5,000. Now, you will need to buy some Romex and some sub panels and whatever outlets you want to power it with, but it's a very approachable project for a lot of people. I think that it's a very exciting project, and it doesn't include the solar, but I'm just thinking about solar gazebos out in your backyard, a place for you to kind of go out, have some shade, get some power. We're going to be doing lots more projects.
Here's the thing. We got solar installed in 2013. So we've had solar for over 10 years. And so a lot of times you're at the beginning of this journey and you're like, so what would that be like in 10 years? Well, I'm here to tell you 10 years from the future. It's awesome knowing that every day that the sun comes out, you're benefiting from that. You're making power from that. And I haven't changed my panels. I haven't changed my inverters. I haven't changed anything. They're just sitting there working for me every single day. And they probably will for another 10 years without any problems. This stuff is meant to just sit out in the sun for years and make you free energy. And I just think because most people don't experience it firsthand, they don't understand that it actually works.
Yep.
The sun is out there every day powering our plants. Why not power your house?
Once you're done with this project, you are going to feel so good. You're going to be able to help your friends be able to do stuff like this. You're going to be able to go buy that plot of land way out in the middle of nowhere and make your own off-grid system.
Yeah, I promise you're almost going to become as crazy as us. That's the only downside is you're going to be talking the ear off of everybody you bump into. You're probably going to want to offer a class at your local community college.
Because it's so powerful. It's so powerful to have your own independent source of energy that nobody can come take away from you. Yep. The sun will come out every day, and until they build a giant spaceship that covers the sun, you are going to be able to generate your own electricity. Not to mention there's other ways to generate electricity.
Yeah.
From wind. From
I know. I mean, you could just hook a wind generator up to this.
There is a way to do that as well.
And this has a place to put a generator. So if you already have a natural gas generator or other, you can hook that up here as well and never be without electricity.
Exactly.
And I got to tell you, since we've got a generator and power walls and solar, it feels so good knowing there's really never a time we're going to lose power, and we haven't. I mean, since we've been on this journey, we've never lost power. We remember that episode years ago where a tree fell and hit the line down the street?
It cut our line. Right.
And power stayed on.
They weren't going to be able to get to it for like a week. We wouldn't have been able to put out the show, but we had the backup power. We had the solar and it was all working. You can have the same system, except in this case, for way less and without all the red tape.
I know.
Oh my gosh. I'm so excited about it. Thank you so much for joining us. I could talk about this all day. I could. It's dangerous. And you will too once you've experienced it. I'm so excited for you on your journey towards free energy that you can capture from the sun.
Use our referral link so that you get the best pricing at Big Battery, because we work with those guys all the time and we try and pass on those savings to you.
We'll see you guys next time on Now Let's Review.